The blood trail stopped at a fence made of bent willow branches, and beyond it, warm light spilled across the snow like something alive. I had been tracking Bram's wolf since moonrise, following drops of red through drifts turned blue in the dark, my breath fogging harder with every mile that took me farther from my own hall. A pack wolf did not simply vanish. He had been struck by a poacher's arrow near the ridge trail 2 nights past, and when he had not returned to the den by the second dusk, I had gone after him myself, because that is what a king does when one of his own is bleeding somewhere in the cold. The trail had not been an easy one to hold. Twice I lost it where the wind had scoured the ridge clean of snow, and twice I found it again by luck as much as skill, a smear of red against white where he had paused to rest, or the faint half-print of a paw dragged rather than set. My own men had wanted to come with torches and horns, the whole formality of a hunting party, and I had refused them. A wounded creature does not need noise closing in around it. It needs quiet, and someone willing to walk slowly enough to find where it has gone to ground. So I went alone, the way I had gone alone into every hard thing since I became king, because I had never yet found a burden a man could rightly ask another to carry in his place. By the 3rd hour past moonrise, the trail had grown so faint I nearly turned back twice, certain I had lost it for good, certain I would have to return to my hall, and tell my people that one of our own had simply vanished into the winter, the way creatures sometimes did, swallowed by cold and distance with no explanation left behind. But each time doubt caught me, I found another mark, not blood this time, but a print too clean, too deliberately placed, as though something had been walking beside him, steadying him, guiding rather than merely following. I had not expected the trail to end at a cottage. I had not expected, crouched at the threshold of that cottage, to find 6 wolves. Not fighting, not snarling. Lying in a loose half-circle on packed straw someone had laid over the frozen ground, tails tucked, breathing slow, and Bram among them, his wounded leg wrapped in clean linen, his head resting against the boot of a woman kneeling in the doorway with a lantern in one hand, and a look of quiet alarm on her face at the sight of a stranger emerging from the tree line. "You're bleeding," she said first, before anything else, not a greeting, not a question of who I was, only that. I looked down. A branch had opened a shallow line across my palm somewhere in the dark. I had not felt it. "It is nothing," I said. "The wolf, he belongs to my pack lands. I have been tracking him since he was struck by an arrow. He came to me 2 nights ago, dragging that leg." She did not rise, did not startle further, only shifted so the lantern light did not blind me. I did what I could. He would not have survived the night otherwise. That was when the feeling came, not the surge men speak of in old songs, not fire, not thunder. It arrived the way frost finds a window, a slow, spreading clarity, edge by edge, until the whole of my sight was rearranged around her. I had heard other men try to name the moment their bond struck and always thought their words too grand for what must surely be a quieter thing. Now I understood. It was not lightning. It was the hush that falls over a room when someone finally says the thing everyone had been afraid to say. A rightness settling so completely that the moment before it seemed unfinished by comparison. I did not know her name. I already knew I did not intend to leave. "Who are you?" I asked, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "Mina," she said. "Wilhelmina if you want the whole of it, but no one's called me that since my husband died." She said it plainly, the way a person states a fact about weather. "You're staring, my lord. I don't know your face, but I know your bearing. You're him, aren't you? The Alpha King." "Tristan," I said. "Just Tristan at your door." She almost smiled at that, almost, and looked back down at Bram, whose tail thumped once against the straw as though he, too, understood something had shifted in the night air. "Come in before the cold takes what's left of your sense," she said. "You're no good to any wolf bleeding on my step." I stepped over the threshold, and the wolves did not scatter. They watched me with the calm of creatures who trusted the hand that fed them, and slowly, one by one, they settled again, and I understood I had walked into something far larger than a single wounded animal. I counted them properly then in the lantern light. Bram, of course, his legs splinted with what looked like the slats of a broken chair, wrapped tight. Beside him, a young female with a scar across her muzzle who watched me with more wariness than the others, though even she did not rise. Two more curled together near the hearth's warmth that reached the doorway, and an older male with a gray frosted coat lying slightly apart, as though he had claimed himself a place of quiet dignity among the rest. 6 wolves, in a cottage no larger than a single room of my own hall, and not one of them wore the look of a creature merely tolerating its keeper. They wore the look of creatures who had been safe here long enough to stop remembering what it felt like not to be. Inside, the cottage was small and spotless. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, and along one wall stood shelves lined with jars of salve, rolled bandages, and dishes scored with the marks of countless meals set down for creatures that were not pets. She moved to a basin, wrung out a cloth, and reached for my hand before I could protest. "Let me see that. I have survived worse than a scratch." "I did not ask what you have survived. I asked to see your hand." There was no defiance in it, only the same plain steadiness she'd shown at the door, and I found I could not refuse her. I gave her my hand, and when her fingers closed around mine to hold it steady, the clarity I had felt at the threshold sharpened into something almost unbearably tender, as if every instinct I had spent my life sharpening for war had been, all along, only waiting for this one small task: to be still and let this woman tend a wound. 10 winters, I said, because I could not stay silent while she worked. "How long have you been doing this?" Her hands paused just slightly over the cloth, long enough that I stopped counting. "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." She tied off the linen and released my hand as though the matter were settled, though her eyes lingered on mine a moment longer than the task required. 10 winters, since not long after my Howrick died. I found a she-wolf caught in a hunter's snare at the tree line, half frozen, and I could not leave her to die alone in the dark. I got her free. I fed her. She healed and she left, and the next winter another came, and another after that. Word travels among wolves the way it travels among people, my lord. They know where the door is warm. And you never told anyone. Who would I tell? She rose, wiping her hands on her apron, and there was no self-pity in the question, only honest confusion at the idea. The village has no love for wolves. They fear your pack lands the way they fear storms, necessary, distant, best not provoked. If they knew I was drawing wounded wolves to my very door, they'd have burned this cottage around my ears out of fright, and no one would have believed me when I said the wolves meant them no harm. So I kept it quiet. I fed them. I mended what I could mend, and when they were strong enough, I opened the gate and let them go home. I looked around the small room again, at the shelves of salves worn thin from use, at the neat stacks of clean linen clearly meant for wounds and not for a widow's own modest needs, and felt something in my chest reorganize itself entirely. Not affection alone, though that was there, but the particular ache of realizing a debt has gone unpaid for far longer than anyone should have allowed. "You have been doing my work for me," I said quietly, "for 10 years. Without my knowledge, without thanks." "I never did it for thanks." She said it almost sharply, the first heat I'd heard in her voice. "I did it because a creature was suffering at my gate and I had hands enough to help it. That is all it ever was, my lord. Do not make it larger than it is." But it was larger than that, and we both knew it, even as she turned to bank the fire and pretend the matter closed. "Tell me of him," I said, "Howrick." She did not answer at once. She busied herself refilling a water dish, setting it before the two curled by the hearth, and only when that small task was finished did she speak, her back still half turned to me. "He was a woodcutter. Quiet man, steadier than most. We had 11 years together before a fever took him one bad spring, the kind that moves through a village faster than anyone can pray it away. We had no children. I had thought, before he died, that I would spend the rest of my years exactly as I had spent those 11 mending his shirts, keeping his supper warm, growing old in the shape of a life built around another person. She set down the empty pail. Then he was gone, and I discovered I did not know how to be a woman shaped around no one at all. The wolves gave me a shape again. That is the plainest truth of it, my lord. I did not save them so much as they gave me back a reason to rise before dawn. That is not a small thing to give a person. No, she agreed. It is not. She turned back to me then, and there was no self-pity in her face, only the calm honesty of someone who had made peace with a hard year long before I had ever knocked on her door. I do not tell this to be pitied. I tell it so you understand why I never sought thanks for what I did here. The wolves were never a kindness I performed. They were the kindness that was done to me, dressed up as though I were the one doing the giving. I did not know in that moment how to answer her without saying too much too soon, so I said only, "Then I am glad of them twice over, once for Bram's sake, once for yours." She held my gaze a moment, surprised, I think, that I had understood her at all, and something in her posture eased, as though she had braced for a lesser man's response and been met instead with one that did not flinch from her grief. I stayed the night, not inside, for propriety's sake, though she offered a blanket and a place by the hearth without a flicker of hesitation, but in the small barn beside the cottage where I could watch over Bram and the others until dawn. I told myself it was duty. It was not only duty. I lay awake listening to the wind work at the eaves and thought of a woman who had spent a decade mending what the world broke and telling no one, expecting nothing. And I understood that whatever I had believed a queen ought to be, I had believed too small. By morning, Bram could stand. I watched him test his weight on the mended leg, whine once, and then lean his head against Mina's knee in a gesture so plainly grateful that it undid something in me I had thought long since settled into stone. "He'll want to go home soon," she said, scratching behind his ear. "They always do once they're strong enough. I never keep them past their healing." That was never the bargain. What bargain? The one I made with myself. She straightened, brushing snow from her skirt, and for the first time that morning met my eyes directly, without the shield of a task between us. That I would give them shelter, not a cage. That I would ask nothing in return. That I would let them choose to stay or go, same as I'd want chosen for me. "That is not so different from how I try to rule," I said. "Then perhaps you rule better than you know, my lord." A faint, dry warmth colored the words, not quite teasing, but close enough that I felt it land somewhere beneath my ribs. By mid-morning I had sent a second runner, this one to row directly, asking him to send what supplies could be spared without drawing questions: dried meat, more linen, a jar of the stronger salve our own healers kept for deep wounds. I did not want to explain myself yet, not even to my oldest friend, but I could not sit idle in Mina's yard consuming her stores without replacing what I used. When Rose's man arrived that afternoon with a laden pack mule and a raised eyebrow he was wise enough not to voice aloud, Mina looked at the supplies, then at me, and said only, "You did not need to do that," in the same tone she had used about the villagers, as though generosity aimed at her were a debt she had not agreed to owe. "I know I did not need to," I said. "I wanted to. There is a difference, and I think you of all people understand it better than most." She took the salve without further argument, which I understood to be its own small victory. I did not leave that day, though I told myself I would. There was too much to see. The way she checked each wolf's eyes and paws with the same unhurried care a physician might give a prince. The way she spoke to them low and even, never cooing, never treating them as anything less than what they were, proud creatures deserving of dignity even in their weakest hour. I found I could not look away from her without wanting to look again. "You must think me strange," she said at midday, catching me watching as she changed the dressing on a yearling's torn ear. A widow talking to wolves like their neighbors come to borrow flour. I think you are the first person I have met in a very long time who does kindness as though it costs her nothing, when I know full well it has cost you a great deal. She went still at that, the way frost stills a pond, not frozen, only quieted. It has cost me some, she admitted. Coin for the salves. Sleep some nights when a wolf came in poor condition and I did not know if morning would find it breathing. And loneliness, I suppose, though I chose that particular cost myself, long before the wolves ever came. Why? Because after Halric died, I found I did not know how to want anything from people anymore. It was easier to want it from creatures who asked nothing false of me. A wolf does not flatter. A wolf does not pretend grief it does not feel or offer comfort it does not mean. I could trust what I saw in their eyes. She looked at me then, steady and unguarded. I find I am having to relearn that trust, my lord, now that you are standing in my yard. You may call me Tristan, I said. I would like that more than you know. Tristan then. The name in her mouth felt like a key turning somewhere long rusted shut. Though I still do not know what you want from my doorway, now that your wolf is mended. I could have answered with a crown's worth of grand words. I did not. I want to know how a woman who has quietly held together a corner of my kingdom for 10 winters could have done so without a single soul in my hall ever bringing me word of it. Because I never wanted word brought, she said simply. I did not do this to be found. And yet I found you. So you did. Something passed over her face then, not quite fear, not quite hope, but the particular caution of a person unused to being seen and unsure what to do now that she was. What happens now, my lord Tristan, now that you have? I did not have a ready answer, and I would not insult her with a false one. I do not yet know. But I know I do not intend to walk away and pretend I did not see what I saw here. She held my gaze a moment longer, then busied her hands with the yearling's bandage, though I noticed they were not quite steady. Then I suppose you had best come in properly out of my yard and eat something. A king should not go hungry on my account, whatever else becomes of this. That I would learn was as close as Mina came to admitting she wanted me to stay. I sent word back to my hall with a runner at mid-morning that Bram was found and mending, that I would return within days, that my second row should hold the pack land steady in my absence. I did not explain further. I was not yet ready to put words to what I had found, half afraid that naming it too soon might frighten it back into hiding. The way a hand closed too fast will send a bird up out of the grass before you have even seen the color of its wings. I stayed 3 days in truth, though I told myself each morning it would be my last. I helped her haul water and split wood. She insisted she could split herself, and she let me only because, she said, it kept me from hovering over her wolves like a nervous hen. I learned the names she had quietly given the ones who stayed longest. A scarred old male she called Ash for the color of his coat, a shy young female called Birch, and understood that this woman who claimed to want nothing had, in her own private way, built herself a family out of creatures the rest of the world had discarded. It was on the second night that Birch took a turn for the worse. I woke in the barn to the sound of Mina's voice, low and urgent, coming from the cottage, and I was through the door before I had fully finished pulling on my boots. The shy young female lay on her side, breathing in short, shallow pulls, her snow-blind eyes rolling white, and Mina knelt over her with both hands pressed to the animal's flank as though she could hold the fever down by will alone. She was healing, Mina said, and for the first time since I had known her, her voice cracked. She was healing, and now the wound has soured beneath the wrapping, and I do not know. She stopped herself before the rest of the sentence could form, but I heard it anyway. She did not know if this was the night she would lose one. Tell me what you need, I said, already kneeling beside her. Hold her still. Gently, she trusts me, not you, and fear will make this worse. I did as she said, my hand steady over the wolf's shoulders while Mina unwound the old wrapping, grimacing at what she found beneath, and set to cleaning the wound with a vinegar wash that made Birch whimper and thrash weakly against my grip. "Easy," I murmured, not entirely sure if I spoke to the wolf or to the woman working over her with hands that trembled despite 10 years of practice. "Easy. She is not fighting you. She is only afraid, the same as anyone would be." Mina worked in silence for a long while, packing the wound with a paste that smelled of crushed herbs and something sharper beneath, wrapping it fresh, murmuring low words to Birch that were not quite song and not quite prayer, but held something of both. I watched her hands more than I watched the wolf, steady even now, even frightened, moving with the certainty of someone who had done this exact thing more times than she could count, and had never once let the fear show where it might cost a life. When at last Birch's breathing eased into something less ragged, Mina sat back on her heels, and only then did I see how badly her own hands were shaking. "You did not let it show," I said quietly. "The fear, not until now. If I let her see it, she stops trusting the hands trying to save her." She wiped her palms on her apron, though the shaking did not fully stop. "I learned that the first winter. A creature in pain can smell fear on you, and fear tells it that whatever is coming next will hurt worse than what came before. So you make yourself calm, whatever it costs you, because the calm is the medicine as much as anything in the jar." "That is not so different," I said again, "from how a king must stand before his own people in the worst of a crisis." "Perhaps." She looked at me then, something raw and unguarded in her face that the lantern light did not soften. "Only no one has ever once asked whether it costs me anything to stand that way. You are the first, Tristan. I do not think I realized how much I wanted to be asked until you asked it." We sat together the rest of that night, neither of us speaking much, watching Birch's sides rise and fall with steadier breath as the fever broke sometime before dawn, and I understood, watching Mina's exhausted vigil beside a creature the world would never know she had saved, that whatever I had believed love should look like before that night, I had believed too small for this, too. For a devotion this quiet, this unwitnessed, this entirely without need of an audience. By first light, Birch lifted her head and pressed her nose weakly against Mina's wrist, and Mina laughed, a small, exhausted, disbelieving sound, and pressed her forehead briefly to the wolf's in a gesture of such plain relief that I had to look away for a moment, humbled by the size of what I was watching and the smallness of the room it occurred in. "She'll live," Mina said, when she trusted her voice again. "Yes," I said, "because you would not let her do otherwise." On the second evening, as we sat by her hearth with the wolves settled around us like a strange and patient congregation, she asked the question I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "Why does it feel different, Tristan, when you look at me? I am not fool enough to think you look at every widow who bandages your wolves this way." I set down the cup I had been turning in my hands. There was no way to answer her gently and also honestly, so I chose honesty and hoped gentleness would follow. Among my people, there is a bond that finds a man once if he is fortunate enough to find it at all. It does not ask permission. It does not care for rank or convenience. It simply arrives, and afterward the world looks different than it did before, because you have seen, finally, the one thing it was always meant to show you. I made myself meet her eyes. "It arrived for me at your door, the moment you looked up from Bram and told me I was bleeding before you asked who I was." She was quiet long enough that the fire popped twice before she spoke. "And what does it ask of me?" "Nothing," I said, and meant it entirely. "It has already asked everything it will ever ask of me. It asks nothing of you at all, save perhaps that you let me stay near enough to learn you properly if you are willing. I would not have you feel cornered by a feeling you did not choose. I have spent 10 years choosing in this cottage, choosing to open the gate, choosing to let each of them go when they were ready, rather than hold on past what was kind." Her hand found Ash's graying head where he lay against her knee, and she looked at me with something that was not quite fear and not quite certainty, but the honest, careful weighing of a woman who did not make choices lightly. "I do not know yet what I choose about you, but I find I do not want you to leave tomorrow as you keep threatening to. Then I will not. That is not the same as choosing you, she said, though the corner of her mouth had softened. No, I agreed, but I have learned patience from watching you tend creatures who could not be rushed into trusting you. I can learn it again for you. On the third morning, before the village ever learned what I had found, Ro himself arrived, having grown impatient with runners and messages, and wanting to see with his own eyes what kept his king from his hall. I met him at the tree line, away from the cottage, because I was not yet ready for even my oldest friend to see the whole of it before I had found the words to explain it properly. You look, Ro said, studying my face with the frank appraisal of a man who had fought beside me since we were boys, like someone who has swallowed a secret too large for his own chest. I have found something I did not expect to find, I admitted. Bram, I am told, was found and is mending. That much the runners managed to say plainly enough. It is the rest that has half my hall wondering if you have lost your senses, wandering 3 days from your own seat for one wolf's sake. It was never only one wolf's sake. I told him then, as plainly as I could, of the cottage and the 6 wolves and the widow who had tended creatures from our pack lands for 10 winters, without a single soul in my hall ever bringing me word of it, and I watched Ro's face move from disbelief to something graver as the shape of what I described became clear to him. 10 winters, he repeated, and no one knew. No one was meant to know. She kept it that way on purpose, out of fear the village would turn on her if her secret were ever found. And now you have found it. Now I have found her, I said, and something in the way I said it must have carried more than I intended, because Ro went very still, the way a man goes still when he recognizes a thing he has heard of only in old stories and never once expected to witness firsthand. The bond, he said, not a question. The bond, I confirmed. He was quiet a long moment, weighing it, and I understood he was doing what any good second ought to do, considering not only my happiness, but the whole of what such a thing would mean for the pack, the succession, the delicate balance a king's choices always disturbed whether he wished them to or not. Does she know what she is to you? She knows there is a bond. I do not think she yet understands the whole of what that means for a kingdom, only what it means between the 2 of us in this yard. And what will you do? I will not rush her, I said, and heard in my own voice a certainty I had not fully possessed until I spoke it aloud. She has spent 10 years learning to give shelter without asking anything in return. I do not intend to be the first thing in her life that demands payment for itself. Whatever she chooses, she will choose it freely, in her own time, or she will not choose it at all, and I will have to learn to live with that, bond or no bond. Ro studied me a moment longer, then something eased in his shoulders, and the old, familiar humor returned to his eyes. Well, I came prepared to drag you home by the collar of your coat. I find instead I am glad to have come only to see this for myself. Hold my chair a while longer, will you? I find I do not mind it half so much, knowing why. Tell no one yet, I said, not until I know how she wishes it told. You have my word, Ro said, and clasped my arm before he turned back toward the ridge trail, leaving me alone again with the small, warm light of Mina's cottage still visible through the bare trees. And I found myself grateful, not for the first time since arriving at her door, that some men understood a king's heart could hold a private thing without endangering the kingdom built around it. By the 4th morning, word had reached the village not from me, and not from her, but from a shepherd boy who had seen wolves resting calm as house cats in a widow's yard, and could not keep the sight to himself. I was in the yard when the first villagers came, a cluster of them at the fence line, faces caught between fear and disbelief, and I watched Mina's shoulders draw tight at the sight of them. 10 years of careful secrecy suddenly laid bare before people she had spent a decade hiding it from. They'll think me a witch, she said under her breath. Or worse, they'll think I've been harboring danger at the village edge and never warned them. They will think what I tell them to think, I said, because I intend to tell them the truth, and the truth does you nothing but credit. I walked to the fence myself. I did not raise my voice, because a king does not need volume to be heard when he means what he says. This woman, I told them, has spent 10 winters healing wolves from my own pack lands at her own cost, asking nothing, telling no one, so that creatures under my protection would not die alone in the snow. She has done more for the peace between your village and my lands than any treaty I have signed. If any of you have looked upon her with suspicion, you owe her instead a debt you did not know you carried. I let that settle before I finished. I would count it a personal offense against my own house if she were treated with anything less than the respect such a debt demands. I watched fear give way slowly to something more like shame, and then to a kind of dawning, uncertain gratitude, as the shepherd boy's mother stepped forward and said quietly that she had lost a lamb to a hard winter once and never once lost more, and had wondered why, and murmured that perhaps she owed the wolves and the widow more thanks than she'd known to give. Mina said nothing through all of it, but when I turned back to her, her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, and she pressed her lips together as though holding something in that might otherwise spill. One woman lingered after the others had begun to drift back toward the village, an older woman with a shawl pulled tight against the wind, and she approached the fence with the particular hesitance of someone unsure whether her welcome had truly changed or only softened for the moment. "Widow Mina," she said, "I am old Ferris's wife. You tended my boy's fever 3 winters back when the healer was away at the market town and I did not know where else to turn. I never thanked you properly. I did not know, until this morning, that you had spent all those same winters tending creatures the rest of us feared. And I am ashamed it took a king's word to make me see what kindness had been living at our village edge the whole while." Mina's composure, which had held through everything else that morning, wavered visibly at that. "You owe me no thanks for your boy," she said. "That was simply neighbor to neighbor." "Perhaps," the woman said, "but I mean to bring you bread on baking days from now on, whether you call it owed or not. A body should not live so long at the edge of a village and be made to feel like a stranger in it." She dipped her head, first to Mina, then, with evident uncertainty about the correct form, to me, before turning back toward the village with a lighter step than she had arrived with. "You see," I said quietly, once she was out of earshot, "the ledger runs both ways in the end. You gave this village 10 years of a peace they did not know to thank you for. It seems they mean to begin repaying it in their own small fashion." "I do not know what to do with being repaid," Mina admitted, and there was something almost bewildered in her voice, as though gratitude were a language she had grown unaccustomed to hearing spoken toward herself. "I have spent so long being the one who gives that I have forgotten the shape of receiving." "Then I imagine we shall have to learn that together," I said, "for I confess I have never been especially skilled at receiving either. A king is so rarely offered anything without a price quietly folded inside it. I find I do not know what to do with kindness that asks for nothing back, any more than you do." She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face softened into an expression I had not yet seen on her, not the careful steadiness she wore while tending wounds, nor the guarded caution she wore around questions of the bond, but something simpler, something almost shy, as though the two of us had stumbled together onto the same unfamiliar ground at the very same moment. "Then we are equally unpracticed," she said. "I suppose that is its own kind of fairness." "You did not have to do that," she said, once the villagers had gone, murmuring among themselves in a tone far gentler than the one they'd arrived with. "I did," I said. 10 winters is too long for kindness to go unnamed. I could not undo the 9 that came before I knew you existed. I could at least see to it the 10th ended differently." "And what of the 11th?" she asked, and there was a tremor in it that told me she already knew what she was asking. "The 11th," I said, closing the distance between us. "I would like to spend where I can watch you work and hand you linen when you ask for it, and learn the names you give to creatures no one else thought worth naming. I would like that winter and everyone after, if you will have me for them." She looked past me, to ash and birch, and the others settled in the thin morning sun, to the small kingdom of quiet mercy she had built with her own 2 hands and told no one about for 10 years. And then she looked back at me, and something in her face opened the way a door opens when a hand finally stops hesitating on the latch. "I have spent 10 winters giving shelter to anything that came to my gate wounded and asking to be let in," she said. "I suppose it is only fair I learn to let something good in, for once, without waiting for it to prove it will not hurt me first. I would rather prove it slowly and truly than ask you to trust it all at once," I said. "You have earned the slow kind of proving. I intend to give it to you." She reached out then and took my still bandaged hand in both of hers, not to tend it this time, only to hold it, and I felt the frost-clear rightness of the bond settle deeper still, not as fire or thunder, but as the particular, ordinary warmth of a hearth finally lit in a room that had stood cold and waiting far longer than it should have. "Then stay," she said, "not because a bond commands it. Because I am asking you to." I would have stayed for that alone, I told her, bond or no bond at all. Behind us, Ash rose from the straw, stretched, and pressed his graying head briefly against her knee before padding toward the tree line, healed enough at last to choose the wild over the gate, and Mina watched him go with the same steady, unpossessive tenderness she had given him every day of his mending. No grasping, no grief, only the quiet gladness of having helped a thing find its own strength again. "He'll not come back this way," she said, watching until the trees swallowed him whole. That's how I know I did it right. I thought, watching her watch him, that I had come looking for one wolf in the snow, and found instead the one heart in my kingdom steady enough to hold everything broken that came to her door, including, now, a king who had not known until that night how much of himself had been waiting, unnamed, for a woman who asked for nothing and had, without ever meaning to, become the only thing I wanted to give everything to. The runner I sent that afternoon carried different news than the first, that I would be longer delayed than expected, that Rose should not hold my chair for me, only my patience, and that when I returned to my hall, I did not intend to return alone. I did not write why. I found, standing in Mina's yard with the last of the wolves dozing in patches of thin winter sun, that some things were better carried home in person, spoken plainly, the way she had taught me plain things ought to be spoken, without ornament, without performance, only the truth, offered freely to whoever had the sense to receive it. I did not ask her to come to my hall that week, though I wanted to more than I had wanted anything in a long while. I had learned enough of her by then to know that a woman who had spent 10 years choosing carefully, on her own terms in her own yard, would not be rushed toward a decision as large as a king's hall simply because the king in question found himself impatient. So instead I asked something smaller. "Will you show me the ridge trail," I said, "where you first found Ash caught in that hunter's snare? I should like to see the place myself if you are willing to walk it with me." She studied me, perhaps searching for some hidden weight behind the request, and finding none, nodded. "It is a fair walk. You will want your boots properly laced this time, my lord, unless you mean to lose another layer of skin to my brambles." We walked it together that afternoon, past the tree line and up along the frozen stream she used as a marker, and she showed me the exact bent willow where she had found Ash all those winters ago, half a boy's lifetime before I had ever thought to wonder what quiet mercies might be happening at the far edges of my own kingdom without my knowledge. She spoke of each wolf as we passed the places she remembered them, where Birch had first stumbled into her yard snowblind and starving, where a nameless yearling had once refused to leave her side for a full week before trusting the wild again. I listened to all of it, memorizing not merely the words but the particular light in her face as she spoke of creatures no one else had ever thought to ask her about, and I understood that this walk, more than any declaration I might make in a great hall, was the truest courtship either of us could offer the other, an honest accounting of the years that had shaped us, given freely, asked for by nothing but genuine wanting to know. "You have never told this to anyone," I said, when we paused at the ridge's highest point, the whole snow-quiet valley spread below us, her cottage a small warm coal of light in the distance. "There was never anyone who wished to hear it before," she said. "It is a strange thing, Tristan, to have kept a whole decade of your own heart folded away in a drawer, certain no one would ever ask to see it, and then have a king appear at your door and ask anyway." "I did not come looking for your heart," I said. "I came looking for a wounded wolf. I count it the finest accident of my life that the two were hiding in the very same place." She laughed then, a full, unguarded sound I had not yet heard from her, and the sound of it settled into me with the same slow, frost-clear certainty the bond itself had carried from the first night, until I could no longer tell where the bond's rightness ended and my own plain, ordinary wanting of her began. That evening she showed me the ledger she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard, not coin, but names, dates, small notes in a careful hand. Ash, first winter, torn shoulder, mended by spring. Birch, third winter, snowblind, healed slow but healed whole. 10 years of quiet accounting that no one had ever been meant to read, and she let me read it anyway, sitting close enough that our shoulders touched. And somewhere in the reading I understood that this was the truest crown I had ever been shown, not gold, not any hall's high seat, but a widow's careful hand recording a decade of mercy she had never once expected to be thanked for, and now, at last, was.